Right. Okay, so Hanif has kindly wrote the abstract for me, which I read a few days ago, and thought, okay, what am I supposed to talk about? So one of the things within Horizon that we've been looking at, we've very much been following a lot of the debate around open data, and sort of, and we're actively engaged in that, and are teaching people how to use open data, and they've been very good at getting us in touch with the World Bank and work with them around their open data. And I view open data as, yes, the public information access online using open standard protocol. Catherine, I'm just doing it on paper. Standard protocols, standard formats, open APIs. And to a certain degree, you can draw the conclusion that this is a logical conclusion from the Freedom of Information Act, given what has happened with technology. When it was the case that you know, the data was swirlwind databases that you know, it was hard to make them accessible. People didn't have the internet. The way in which you would go about a freedom of information request was you'd write a letter and you get a letter back. Pretty obvious. Digital technology has an impact there. You get to the point where it's cheaper just to put the data out there than to deal with every one of the damn FOIs that come in. And to a certain degree, Dropbox having just opened up all our data for 4 hours because they lost all the passwords. I've taken the view that in my work, everything I do is open to an FOI. So the idea that putting it on Dropbox might be insecure is a nonsense, because anyone can ask to see it anyway. So I don't particularly care about that. But so one argument is open data is the logical conclusion of freedom of information, purely from a technology and cost point of view. So if you take the same analogy and say, well, let's look at personal information. Actually, I think there's a logical conclusion here of the Data Protection Act. I can ask anyone what data they've got, and indeed, companies like Experian here in Nottingham would like me to sign up to pay a monthly fee to get that information from them, called their credit expert. And amusingly, I've tried to sign up to that service 3 times. And even though they're very good at identifying me online and checking my credit and everything else and saying, yes, this person can have another credit card, their interface to actually get authenticated and allow myself to see their data is unbelievably provocative. I've now failed 3 times to complete the process. But rather than us asking for this data all the time, we're supposed to have a right to see this data. So we might say, well, is a logical conclusion, given where technology is today, instead of issuing pieces of paper to companies saying, please give me my data, that they have an obligation, if I ask for it, that they make it available to me online using open standard protocols, open formats, and open APIs. So let's take banking as an example. Most people these days could have internet banking if they wanted it. Not everyone uses it or wants it, but you could do. But I have to go through this rather tedious web interface, and me as a human being has to interact with it. And if I want to have programs that can actually take all my financial transactions and build something up around that, so new applications and new services, you know, Mint, for example, when they did this in the US, proceeded to employ lots of people to scrape the web pages. Well, guys, can you please do what we're doing with open data, which is don't produce it in proprietary closed formats that require human beings to interact with, but make it available as standard formats, standard protocols, and open APIs. At this point, people go, oh my God, I don't want software that, you know, accessing this private data. And it's like, well, so if you think there's any more security through the web UI compared to a machine, a programming interface, you're just kidding yourself, because it only costs you a few £100 to pay someone to write a scraper for any website you want, and they can get programmatic access to it anyway. So open data, we both look at the government and public sector data that they want to make available, but also then government and corporations and the data that they hold, and say what would be enabled if we made this, if this information was available. And I'll actually go further. I mean, one of the things that annoys me enormously is that a large number of the services that we get today, while they're very good at tracking, here's an example, Google tracking me on the iPhone, I would actually just like the data, because I would like having recorded this data to be able to have other applications have access to it. But we're locking data up in applications and proprietary applications and services rather than opening the data. And that's, that's a good example. I left this picture on as well because that's actually inertial tracking of someone from their car going around Sainsbury's. So when we get to location data and personal location, I mean, I'll tell you which aisle you're standing in and what product's in front of you. And I can see value in that to the consumer, you know, optimize my route around Tesco's. Because Tesco's publish where all the products are on the shelves and the layout of their shops online. That's open data and that's public data. But then I want to mash it up with, you know, my data. And I really like that any of the services that want to engage in tracking me, whether it's GPS or whether it's augmented or these sorts of things, that they are required to make that data available, and the data becomes a service that is independent of the application. And this is one of the areas where it's challenging to the existing business models, and it's one of the reasons why it's a fit topic for research. And often the data is coming up in funny places. So here's some energy monitoring data. And here's 7 days of a graph along here, and this is 1 day expanded up to the big graph at the top. It took a while for the engineers who invented smart meters to realize how dangerous this stuff was. So if I was to tell you this at 9 o'clock in the morning and that's 8.5 kilowatts, what's happening at 9 o'clock in the morning in that household? It's very easy. Someone's having a shower, right? There are only 2 appliances in the house to take 8.5 kilowatts. One's a cooker and the other one's a power shower. That monitoring of the data there, it tells you a lot about what's happening in that household. And smart meters are one of the areas where, having built them so that they didn't have to do a truck roll and read the meter, someone then said, oh great, we can use all this because we can sample very frequently. We use this to build a smart grid. And we could use all this very detailed information to inform how the grid of the future would work. And it's only recently, and I mean recently in the last year or two, that people started saying things like, privacy, please, you know. So this is a good example because here's the 7 days, shower, 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 shower. Oh, hang on, is this person very grubby? Or noticing that actually if you look at the dates, that's the weekend, they were clearly away for the weekend. Oh, great, that's when I should burgle their house. Right, so the behavioural information you can get out of these sorts of things is quite detailed. And there was a day, quite a few months ago, when this particular research assistant, a female who works for me, walked into the office and a rather cheeky research student said to her, I see you didn't have a shower today. And she walked through the door. And of course what had happened was the data, the sensor had simply died and not recorded the data. And she was mortified. Oh, I'll check that out. So the absence of data does not mean there was zero energy consumption. Now the reason to bring this example up is that there was a danger that this data was going to get squirreled away, owned by electricity companies, and that they were going to try and extract value from it in proprietary ways. And it's like, no, this is the consumer's data. Will you please give the consumer the data, and they can choose which services they would give the data to, or even some derived information from data, and someone could give me value for that. So I'd like my data in this example to be mine, so that I can take it along to a different energy company and say, well, here's what I consumed last year. How much would you have billed me for? Instead of the usual type in the number of kilowatts. Now this is going to be increasingly important in the energy sector, simply because we're going to have to do demand-side management, because we can't just switch the wind on and off, and so we're going to have to deal with a highly variable supply. So there's lots of applications here of how we can use this data, but it's very important that this data be on the consumer, and the only way that makes sense is if it's an open standard and it's openly available and I can move it, and that portability is critical. The other thing is there's often things that people think sort of feel open, but they're not. So, you know, Facebook being the classic example, where, you know, there are Facebook apps that were written a year ago that don't work anymore because the damn API has changed, so they just keep fiddling around. My wife uses a photo sharing site called 365 Project, and they have given up trying to track Facebook and maintain the link with Facebook because the buggers keep changing the interface all the time. And that's just generally badness. The data's getting locked in there. We wrote some software that wanted to try and use the data that was in Facebook and other applications, and within an hour of running that software, the account was shut down and banned because that Facebook terms and conditions right at the end says, thou shalt not do that. It's only for human beings to look at the data. So, you know, there are places where we are putting actually quite a lot of data where it's getting locked up in terms of terms and conditions and proprietary silos, and that's not good. Now, I put evilness there originally, but I think I'll just change it to badness, because sometimes it's not intent, it's just sheer laziness and, well, that's the quickest way we can do it.